So let's start off with the 4 immeasurables to set our motivation for the class. Okay. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from the happiness that knows no suffering. And may all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment and hatred for those held close and distant. Okay. All right. So how's it going over where the rest of you are in terms of the lead up to Christmas? Does it start to feel like things are getting into gear? Everything's getting busier? Yeah, it's a bit like that over here. All right. Okay,
We have
well,
one
so,
more holiday before Christmas.
oh,
We
of
have
course, you've got
Thanksgiving coming up
Thanksgiving, don't you? When does Thanksgiving happen?
next Thursday. And we must all remember Venerable Rabina's advice of
What
keep
did
your
she
mouth
say?
shut. She says, keep your mouth shut
That was her advice.
when it comes to family.
Right, okay. Uh, I mean, this is probably like any holiday, isn't it? It's like when you get together with family, you tend to fall back into old habits, don't you? So you think I'm doing so well, like, my mind's progressing, I'm becoming a kinder person. And then you go back and spend some time with your family, and then you find out not so much, not just yet. But it's a good measure, isn't it? It's kind of like a good yardstick as to how well you're going with your practice when you go and you go into sometimes difficult family situations and you see how well you're able to maintain your patience and how well you're able to keep your mouth shut and all of that. Yeah. Oh dear. Yep, that's nice advice. Very Rabina advice. Okay, so it's also been quite timely that we're talking about patience, I guess, in the lead up to Christmas. On the one hand, it's a fun time of year for many people, but also on the other hand, it can be challenging in some respects. Let me just check. I've got my uh, sorry, just checking my camera, and can you still hear me okay? Yep. Okay. All right. All right. So last week we talked quite a lot about anger and the various assumptions that we have behind anger. So we came up with quite a list. I think there was about 14 different assumptions that we may have at various times that help to support our anger, so that it makes it harder and harder for us to reduce our anger because of those assumptions. We're not really prepared to get rid of our anger entirely. So it's really good to have a deep dive into our own minds and check out what other kind of assumptions and wrong ideas support that allowing or being content for anger to remain within our mind stream, that leaves a doorway open for anger to arise. Because until we really attack those underlying assumptions, then we can try to minimize the anger that arises in our mind, which is that intention to harm, based on an inability to bear the difficult circumstance that we find ourselves in, and then developing that intention to harm. So we can try and reduce the intention to harm, but it will be very difficult to entirely evict it from our minds without challenging those assumptions. So we really want to get to a point where it's like we don't want even the slightest bit of anger to arise in our mind. Just like absolutely, it has to go. As soon as I see it on the verge of arising, it cannot remain. It's like the analogy is given like with any affliction, whether it's anger, whether it's attachment, pride, jealousy, we want to have the attitude towards any of these afflictions, which is like if a poisonous snake were to fall in our lap. So if you had a poisonous snake falling in your lap, your immediate reaction would be to jump up and get rid of it, wouldn't it? You wouldn't sort of sit there with the, I don't know what you sort of poisonous snakes you have over there, but in Australia, we've got a lot, so, and a very common one would be like the eastern brown snake, which is incredibly poisonous, but also very prevalent. So if you had an eastern brown snake fall in your lap, you wouldn't just be sitting there going, oh, what a beautiful snake that is. How lovely. Let me look at it. Let me feed it. We'll just let it sit there for a bit longer because I'm sure this snake is going to benefit me in some way. You don't have that attitude at all, do you? In fact, I remember one time when I used to live up at Chenrezig Institute on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, here in Australia, and it's sort of in the bush area. And so it's like in the nunnery where we lived, there was like all these huts that are kind of dotted down the hillside, and there'd be like, quite a lot of trees and bushes and stuff in between all the various huts. And also because it's subtropical, you get quite a lot of growth happening very quickly. So even if someone would come through with the whippersnipper and reduce all the kind of weeds and grass around, then they grow up very quickly again. So it's also, on the one hand, because it's regional area, you're more likely to get snakes. And on the other hand, because there's a lot of growth, then it's a nice place for them to come, and it's also quite hard to spot them. And also at nighttime, we don't have any lighting really very much around the property. So you'd be going everywhere with a torch, mostly so that you didn't step on a snake. So I remember one time there was one of our most senior nuns, Annie Marg, and she was going from her hut to the Gompa, and it was not a very far walk, probably like, 20, 30 meters. And I was looking from my hut and I watched her going from the Gompa, and she was walking along at her normal pace like this until she got to one point. All of a sudden, she jumped in the air, ran back to her house. And I was like, I know what she's seen. It's definitely a snake, right? You're just out of there as soon as you can. There was another time when I was walking down the hill from the Geshe, who was he's lived right up in the top hut of the hill, and it was nighttime, and I'd been up there, I think, cooking dinner for him. And one of the other nuns had been up there doing some tidying, and so she'd taken down the rubbish, which had to go all the way down to the bottom of the section where we lived in. And so I came down after her, and as I walked down the hill, I saw the rubbish bag just cast to the side of the path, no sign of the nun, until eventually I found her. She said, yeah, there was a snake, there was a snake. I just had to go. Right. So this is our attitude that we should have towards the afflictions that are arising in our mind. You don't wait for even a second. You don't wait to check it out. Is this a helpful thing for me or not? Right? You just want to have that determination to get rid of those afflictions as soon as possible. So that needs to be our attitude towards things like anger. Okay, so in terms of the methods that we can use then, the training that we can do for our mind in order to increase our patience or our ability to bear, our tolerance towards difficult situations that otherwise would be a condition for our anger to arise, then we have these 4 methods or 4 trainings according to Geshe Chengawa. So we just looked at them briefly last week, and I'll just bring those up again now. Okay. So you can see those 4 there? Yep. Okay, great. Okay, so these are like I said, these are the 4 methods, the 4 ways that we train our mind in order to prepare ourselves for the challenging situation. So when somebody's doing harm to us, or whether we're experiencing some suffering, for instance, any kind of difficult situation, then we can apply these 4 ways. of approaching it. So I think I mentioned last week, really the training in patience comes before the difficult situation. Did I talk about this last week? Yes? No?
I'm not sure we
We
spoke about that
started.
specifically.
I don't. Yeah, I don't
Okay.
think we finished. I think
We
we
didn't
may have
finish.
looked at it briefly.
Okay. Yeah. So when you encounter the challenging situation, so when somebody is doing harm to you, at that point, you want to already have all the tools in your mind ready to put into action. So the training in patience really comes prior to that challenging situation, because at the moment, the thing is that our mind is so habituated to anger, then it's like as soon as we encounter a person who is trying to do us harm, or as soon as we encounter some kind of suffering or other challenge, then it's like anger is just sitting there so kind of ready to go that it's the one that's going to jump up and manifest in our mind. So what we need to do then is, before we encounter those difficult situations, then we need to train our mind in a different way of thinking that counters the anger way of thinking, so that that becomes the most familiar, the most habituated way of thinking in our mind. So that then in that instant, when you come across that challenging situation, you're more likely to recall that new way of thinking that you've accustomed to, and anger has less of a chance to really get a look in. So in situations where you've encountered the difficult person and anger has already arisen, then at that point, it's quite hard to bring in these tools of patience that you may have a little bit of familiarity with. So at that point, probably what you need to do is, for instance, go for a walk, calm your mind down, do something else that maybe helps you to just change your focus away from that challenging situation to something else, so that your mind becomes a little open, and then you can start to rethink about your tools of patience that you've been training in. So that's one thing to do. The other thing to do is you can look back at the anger. So at that moment when you're very angry, you can look at the anger itself in the face and really ask the anger, or analyze the anger and check to see, are you actually correct? Are you a correct consciousness? Are you assessing this situation accurately? So that helps to do two things. So one is that it takes the focus away from the person that you're angry with. So anger very much needs to focus on the person that you're angry with, right? So as soon as you change the focal object, or the thing that you're focusing on, and look back at the anger, then it becomes like you have this little doorway, or this little opening up to then reduce your anger. So you focus back on the anger and you say, well, are you actually correct? Anger is never correct. It's always going to be a wrong consciousness. Anger always exaggerates the negative attributes of the thing that it's focused on. Always. It never gives you a complete, proper, realistic picture. Right? It always makes things seem much worse than they actually are. It always, when I say much worse than they actually are, not to say that you're not suffering, that's not what I'm talking about, but it paints a picture of the focal object in the sense that this person who's harming me is 100% bad, essentially, is what anger does. It makes it appear to you through your anger that person has no qualities whatsoever, that they're 100% in control of their actions, and they're not worthy of my compassion or loving kindness. This is essentially the picture that anger creates for us. And it's always wrong. Not to say that a person is not harming you, not saying that that's not accurate, but just in terms of this exaggeration, that's definitely wrong. So that's another tool that you can use also at that moment when you're already angry. So in terms of these 4 types of patients, these are ones that we want to train in before we get angry so that we have something to utilize in that moment. There's the story of the, I don't know, it's a little bit of a rude story, so apologies in advance, but there's a story that many of the Tibetan lamas tell about there was one guy, maybe he's a monk perhaps, who was meditating on patience. And there was this very cheeky, I don't know if you would say if he was a realized being or not, I don't know. But anyway, he was out to test this monk and his practice of patience. So he went up to the monk who was, thought he was doing a really good job on meditating on patience. And he said, "Oh, what are you meditating on? I mean, you're doing a great deal of meditation. What are you meditating on?" And the monk said to him, "I'm meditating on patience." And so the cheeky fellow said, "Oh, are you? Oh, well, then eat shit." and of course, the monk immediately got very angry. And so it was like that person who was being cheeky was basically showing to him that he hadn't trained enough in his patience, right? So he wasn't intentionally going about doing harm to that monk, but he was actually, in a sense, helping the monk to show him where he had not yet fully trained in patience. So, if you cannot actually put into practice the tools that we study with regards to patience in the moment, that's a sign that you haven't done enough training, prior training. Yeah. Okay, so with respect to these 4 types of patience, we've got this patience with regard to setting up a target, the patience with respect to loving kindness and compassion, the patience in the manner of the guru disciple, and patience with respect to ultimate reality. So we're going to start, as I said, we'll start with the second one. So the patience with respect to loving kindness and compassion. Okay. So are you all familiar with what loving kindness and compassion actually are? I mean, I've written them down here, so you obviously can read them and know, but are these terms that you've heard before? You understand basically what they involve? I can't see all your faces, so I'm not 100% sure. I see some thumbs up. I'm going to take that as either a yes or you'd rather not say.
I think we all agree that we've heard it.
Yes.
Okay.
Definitely heard it.
I mean, these are fundamentals. These are fundamentals of the Buddhist practice, loving kindness and compassion. It's really, when you look at the presentation of Buddhism, there are 2 aspects in terms of, the fundamentals of the practice. So one is in terms of view, so the view of selflessness specifically. And the other is in terms of conduct. And the main conduct in the Buddhist path is non-harmfulness. So non-harmfulness really requires the support of loving kindness and compassion to really practice non-harmfulness. So in terms of loving kindness and compassion, these are 2 states of mind that they work in tandem with one another, essentially. So with loving kindness, it is that, as I've written here, the wish for beings to have happiness. And for compassion, it's the wish for beings to be free from suffering. So we all have these to some extent within our mind currently. But the issue is that with these that we have within our mind is that they're quite partial or they're biased. So we find it easy to generate a wish for others to have happiness when we direct it towards our family and when we direct it towards our friends. And likewise with compassion, also we find it quite easy to develop that with respect to our friends and family. And also probably we find it easy to develop towards beings who are distant from us, like we don't know them personally, but we read about the suffering that they're experiencing. So maybe it's people who are in a state of war, in a warfare area, or people who are going through great famine or other kinds of sufferings, right? We don't know them, but we understand those sufferings and we can develop some compassion on that basis. I think it's interesting is that probably if we got to know some of those people who are very far from us, we don't really know personally, we might find that our loving kindness and compassion decreases if we find that we don't particularly like the person. If we start to see some sort of negative attributes in the person, chances are our loving kindness and our compassion will decrease. So this is because we have this bias in our mind where, with respect to those that we're attached to, so our friends and family, we find it easy to develop that loving kindness and compassion. It's almost like with attachment involved, it's like you're putting some funds in the friendship bank when you develop loving kindness and compassion, and you do nice things to your friends and your family, because you feel like that is building up the relationship that then you yourself will benefit from. So it's even with respect to our friends and family, it's not a pure type of loving kindness and compassion. And you can tell that's the case because if it were the case that your friend or somebody who is close to you actually turned around and started harming you, you would probably lose that loving kindness and compassion for them because you lose the attachment for them. So attachment is very much self-focused. It's about what others can do for me. It's not really about what I can do for others. So as soon as you have your loving kindness and your compassion mixed up with your attachment, then your loving kindness and compassion are really, you allow them to come out when there is like some sort of, what do you say, implicit benefit for you in that process. So we find it hard to develop that loving kindness, that wish for beings to have happiness and the wish for them to be free from suffering, towards beings who actually seek to harm us, who we'd put in that enemy category. Or just even people that we find a bit difficult, right? It's harder to develop that loving kindness and compassion towards them because then we already have a bit of an aversion towards those people. And loving kindness and compassion really require us to, at some level, be able to see the beings, the focus of our loving kindness and compassion, as being appealing or beings who we would have affection towards. So when you have aversion towards others, then you don't feel that affection. They don't appear as objects or they don't appear as people that are appealing in some way. And when I say appealing, I don't mean like physically attractive. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about appealing in the sense of you feel that sense of closeness towards them on the basis of how you think about the person. So this is our current problem, right? Is that we are biased due to our attachment and due to our aversion and our indifference towards those people that we don't know. And so our loving kindness and compassion are also partial and biased, and they will arise in relation to those that we have attachment towards, and they won't arise in relation, or not very much, in relation to those that we have aversion towards. So part of, like, some of the methods that are used in Buddhist practice to develop unbiased or impartial loving kindness and compassion are extremely useful. We're not going to go into them today, but especially when you look at the methods for developing the mind of enlightenment, bodhicitta, which is this sort of like the ultimate altruistic aspiration that you can develop in your mind. So those tools that are used to develop those really high states of mind, they can be extremely useful for us to develop this unbiased or impartial loving kindness and compassion. So we won't go into those today, but that's something, if you're interested to do more study on that, you'll find it really helpful. Yeah. So what we're going to look at is kind of like, in terms of this particular practice, we will look at how we can see, or how we can develop an unbiased understanding of how all beings act, essentially, and what all beings experience. So the first question to ask then in our development of loving kindness and compassion towards others is to think, well, when somebody harms us, who is in control of that action of harm, that action that's occurred? So who would you say is it? So say, for instance, this is the classic example that Shanti Devi uses, and many of you have probably heard this example before. So if somebody, for instance, hit you with a stick, beat you with a stick, who would you get angry at? Or what would you get angry at?
The person.
You get angry at the person, right? You wouldn't get angry at the stick? Why not?
It's not sentient.
It's
It
not
didn't make it.
sentient.
It wasn't. It didn't choose to be in that situation. That choice. The stick was voluntold that it was going to be a part of that.
Okay, so this basically what you're saying is the stick didn't have control over that. It was wielded by the person. Yeah. Is that what, would you all feel the same way? Would any of you get angry at the stick rather than the person? No? Okay, so that's interesting then. So essentially what you'd be saying then is that the stick doesn't have control over the beating. The person is the one that has control over the beating. So the person wields the stick. So therefore the focus of your anger should be the person, not the stick. So then we have to analyze the person and the person's mental continuum. So why does a person actually harm another person?
They are suffering.
They're suffering, yeah. Usually there's suffering going on in their mind, yeah. I mean, there's different types of suffering, aren't there? So it might not be that, we see that person as having like a mental or physical suffering necessarily, but they'll definitely be experiencing one or other of these various types of suffering, which we can talk about. Yep, so they're suffering. What else is going on for that person?
Presumably they're angry.
Presumably they're angry. Well, it would seem they have the intention to harm, right? There. So we would probably assume that they're angry, or at the least they have the intention to harm. Yeah. So then I suppose the question is did that person choose to have the intention to harm? It's an interesting thing to discuss. I'll just bring up the whiteboard just a second.
I have a very, in a way, yes, they did choose to have anger. They did choose,
So
because we all kind of
what
allow that to happen.
we allow it to happen. Okay, so when you get angry, do you choose to get angry?
I allow it to happen, yes. The
Do
thought
you
enters my
really?
mind. Oh, I'm working very, very hard on not allowing it. But yes, I can, I think it, and then I go, no, don't do that. That's stupid. And then I go, but I'm going to do it anyways.
It
And then
happens
I do it.
anyway.
So it usually involves me flipping somebody off. But yes,
So you feel
either
like you
then.
actually have control over the process.
I've been able to slow it down so I can see it growing. And then even though I'm telling my mind, I'm telling myself, hey, think logically.
You don't.
I allow it to happen. Yeah.
Well, then I would say that it's not so much you allowing it to happen, but due to your great familiarity is you can't help yourself.
At the moment of anger, if you can't stop yourself, then it's not intentional. But when we're practicing, I think maybe Shayla was like, because same as with me, like now sometimes I can stop myself. But sometimes it's almost like slow motion, it's about to happen. Still you can't stop yourself. So sometimes that happens. So then we do feel I think I do feel responsible. So.
Or
It's like
are we
there.
also,
Oh,
I'm sorry, or are we also considering anger at the moment when we're unable to control it some sort of consequence of previous negative events that we were a part of?
In what way? I'm not sure I quite.
Well, we spoke the other night about negative karmic events that come back. Maybe the person that committed the murder did not necessarily get punished in at this moment, but it will eventually come back at some point to have that effect. Is this what we're saying is part of the anger continuum, that it's coming back and we're unable to control it?
Well, yeah, I mean, I would say that there is like this great familiarity that we have with anger, and not just anger. There are other things that back up the anger that make it so that it's like we don't actually have control over our minds. So, what you're saying before, Shella, do I pronounce your name? Sorry, did I get it right? Shella? Okay, so what you're saying
yes.
before, Shella, is like that. It sounds to me more like actually you don't have control. It's like you're saying you allow it to happen, but when you say you allow it to happen, that implies that you have a measure of control over it. But rather, the way you describe it is in actual fact, you don't have control, because if you had a choice, knowing what you know, that all the negativities that come with anger, all the problems that it creates for yourself and for others, the way it destroys your peace of mind, that actually if you had a choice and you really had control, that you wouldn't get angry. You'd just go stop, and you'd stop doing it right then and there.
Kind of like I'm being overridden for just I know it's there. And yeah, I kind of feel like I'm allowing that override. I don't know. That's how I feel about it. It's like, oh, there goes the common sense straight out of my mind. I'm going to, flip this person off.
Yeah, I mean, we all have those moments, right? I mean, whether we all end up flipping off the person or not is another matter. But we all have those moments where the anger takes over. Yeah. But even though we know how negative anger is, and especially when you've done a bit of study in this, in this tradition, and you understand how very negative it is and how much problems it creates for you. And like Michael, you're saying, the problems it creates not just in this life, but in the future as well, in future lifetimes. Like there's no way that you would choose to get angry knowing all that you know. So it's like we say, I allow myself to get angry. And on the one hand, I suppose it's helpful to think about it like that, in the sense of there's more that I can do. I know better. I should be doing better. And that can act as a driver to really work hard to control, to work and train and to decrease your anger and allowing it to become manifest, increase your patience and loving kindness. So it can help to think about it in that way. But when we just think about it in terms of what actually happens in our mind, is that actually we don't have control. We as persons don't have control. Our training is, even though we know quite a lot, our training is not good enough to overcome the power, the force of the anger, the habituation of the anger. Really. So this is actually a state of suffering. It's like to have lack control is actually a state of suffering. It's like my teacher often describes this like lacking control as being like in a state of suffering, or in the nature of suffering, in the sense that, like, for instance, if you were in a prison, and in that prison you had, a lot of nice things, you had nice food to eat, you had a nice garden to look at, for instance, but you were not allowed to ever go outside. So that is actually something that is a state of suffering. It's something that is unsatisfactory because you lack control over your existence. You have to stay within this prison. So this is kind of like what our whole existence is like, is that we don't have control We don't have control over our experiences. We don't have control over our mind. So we're kind of stuck with these familiarities that we have, these habituations that we have. So that's what it's like for ourselves. And so it stands to reason that that's what it's like for everybody else. So if a person, yeah, Shella? Oh, Cynthia, you're going to say something?
Sorry, I just have a quick question. When you say we don't have control, that you don't mean like ability to just suppress, right? Because I can have the ability to suppress, but I still have the anger, right? So you don't mean that. Is that correct?
Well, you can develop your ability to reduce and suppress your anger, but the anger itself is so very powerful that your ability is very limited. So, maybe say you've done some training for even like, say, a few years, let's say 5, 10 years, let's say 15, 20 years, 30 years. Chances are you're still going to have a great familiarity with anger, but your ability to suppress that anger will increase over that time, depending how much time you put into your training, how much effort you put into your training. There's really the benefit that we get is very much dependent upon the effort that we put in. So if you put in a little bit of effort, you'll get a little bit of benefit. Put in a big lot of effort over a long period of time, you'll get a good result for that. But still, as long as our anger stays within our mind, together with the things that support the anger, which are things like ignorance and also self-cherishing and also attachment. Attachment and anger, they're like sort of, I wouldn't say two sides of the same coin, but they operate in tandem, attachment and anger. So as long as you still have those ones really controlling your mind and controlling all your activities, then it's unrealistic to expect that your anger is completely going to go. So we think we have a little bit of an ability to reduce our anger in some respects. And it's almost like we think, right, now I know the methods and I have a little bit of ability. Every single time I should be able to control my anger. And I'm allowing my anger to arise. This is what you were saying before, Shella. It's like I'm allowing my anger to arise, and think I'm allowing it to arise because I do have a small ability, and I do understand what I need to be doing. But in actual fact, it's not really like you're allowing it, like you're making a choice. It's actually the fact that the anger is so strong, and also it's supporting kind of choir, which is the attachment and self-cherishing and ignorance, are so very much in control of our minds that it's really not, you don't really have a choice. A person who doesn't have self-cherishing, doesn't have ignorance in their mind, doesn't have attachment in their mind, they can make a choice. They're essentially, in fact, there is no choice for them. There is no reason for them. There is no ground for them to get angry. There would be, there's just no purpose to it. Yeah. Lakme, did you have a question?
Yes. There are times when I'm in a situation and I feel if I do not react, if I just let it pass, the situation could continue or I could be made to feel worse. So I feel I'm kind of defending myself, protecting myself, and ensuring that it's not repeated, that I behave angrily so that I push back right now.
Yeah, yep. And we've probably all experienced situations like that as well in various ways. So, in terms of practicing patience, it's not saying that you can't act to stop the negative behavior that's happening to you. That's not at all what's being said. What we're talking about in terms of the practice of patience is to not have anger arise on a mental level. And then on the basis of not having anger arise. So we do that through, for instance, replacing anger with loving kindness and compassion, which is this first training that we're talking about here. So if we can replace anger, that intention to harm, that wish to retaliate and harm the other person, with instead loving kindness and compassion, which wishes to benefit the other person, then you can choose what is the most skillful way to act in that situation. So it might be with the motivation to benefit the other person that you point out to them that their behavior is negative, that it needs to stop. It might be that you use words to do that. Maybe you even need to say it quite forcefully, but with the intention to benefit the other person. So in terms of stopping the anger, we're talking about what happens on a mental level. It's not talking about what happens on a physical or verbal level. So what happens on a physical or verbal level then stems from the motivation that you have in your mind. So if you then speak out on the basis of anger, so if you allow, we say allow, but if anger arises in your mind, right, because you don't have any control and anger has already arisen, and on that basis you say something negative, or even you physically do something negative to harm the other person, then those actions, those physical and verbal actions, they become negative because they're based on that motivation of anger. If instead you're able to have a pure motivation of loving kindness, a wish to benefit the other person, this is quite hard for us. I'm not saying it's easy. This is something that requires training. It is possible to do it, though, through training, to get to a point where you have a pure loving kindness towards this person. And on that basis, then you speak out because your motivation is to benefit the other person, not to harm them. On that basis of wanting to benefit the other person, you say something to them, then actually your verbal action can become positive. Does that make sense? We've got to make sure we don't fall into the trap of thinking that we're benefiting the other person when really what we're doing is protecting ourselves, right? But it's important to make that distinction. And so we have to look honestly at our own mind and see what's going on in there. So this often for us the best way to go about it to start with is to, like, you said, Rabina said, was like, keep your mouth closed, is to try it, perhaps walk away. If you can walk away from a situation, you can't completely stop the anger. Maybe you start to suppress it at first and it's not as intense as it was at the start. And then gradually over time, you find that the anger might arise. And if you walk away, you're able to allow it to decrease, or it decreases because of your training. And then you're able to generate that loving kindness towards the person gradually over time, right? And you might come back, and then with that motivation of loving kindness, you might actually say something to the person, once you've managed to change your mind with that. But at the start for us, it's quite hard, and we sometimes do fall into that trap of like, I'm really benefiting this person, but actually what you're trying to do is harm them to protect yourself. So it is important to make sure we don't engage in those negative, harmful actions of body and speech on the basis of having that intention to harm. Does it answer your question, Atmi?
Yeah, I need to get my head around it. It's a lot.
It's a lot. It's a total, I think it's like a total sort of 180 on how we usually approach difficult situations. And this is why I was talking about those underlying assumptions behind our anger last week. Because as long as we have those underlying assumptions, we won't think of anger as being something that's really negative. And so every time we're in a challenging situation, our anger will be the thing that we bring up to protect ourselves. And we won't even think that maybe loving kindness or compassion could protect us. Yeah. So it's like completely rethinking how we respond mentally, not physically or verbally, but how we respond mentally in challenging situations.
And about walking away from that situation, I mean, grown up with this fact that strike the iron when it's hot. So, I know it's only going to make the situation worse.
Do Do you say, like, if you do say something, it will make the situation worse? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, like, yeah, what you said is best. You walk away from the situation, you come back in a calm, cooler, better perspective and be able to address it in a more civil manner. That would be ideal. But I would have been in that situation. The other person is even forgotten and bringing it up again later would, I don't know. Does it have the same intensity and the intention that I have brought to that, or has it dissipated in that time with the other person?
Well, it may be at that point you no longer need to readdress it. If things have subsided, it may be that you don't need to address it at that point, later on down the track. And instead you use it as a learning opportunity to then practice the loving kindness and compassion towards that person, so that in the next time that happens, because this is possibly a person that you have a repeated difficulty with, right? So if you, in the meantime, practicing your loving and kindness and compassion in relation to that specific person. So this is one of the things when we're meditating on loving kindness and compassion. I really, really suggest strongly that you look into some of these methods for developing bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment, because that's where the methods for developing loving kindness and compassion that is unbiased are explained so clearly. So when we do the meditations on the loving kindness and compassion, we should really try and make it so that we're practicing in our meditation with individuals that we experience difficulties with in real life. So, if you're sitting there in meditation thinking, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness, may they all be free from suffering and the causes of suffering, and making it very kind of general, you won't find that you get the benefit on a day-to-day basis, because it's like you're thinking in a too general way. Instead, we should be trying to work with individuals that we see or on a regular basis. So, for instance, somebody who you're close to, when you're trying to develop equanimity and reduce your attachment to some and reduce your aversion to others, to actually work with individuals that you do feel a sense of closeness with, and with individuals that you do have difficulty with, you feel that sense of aversion with. So that when you then encounter those individuals in your daily life, you can see, is my meditation making a difference or not? It's like your test. You're going for an exam. That's essentially what it is. It's your meditation exam, is when you then encounter those individuals. Yeah. So it may be the case that over time, because we're looking long term, this is basically our life's practice, is to improve the positive qualities of our mind and decrease the faulty aspects of our mind. So thinking long term, if I practice in my own mind on a regular basis, thinking about these people that I do encounter on a regular basis, and see how over time does my mind change in terms of when that person creates difficulties for me. Does my mental reaction change? Is it different? And then when your mental reaction starts to change, that gives you more opportunity to act with more variety on a physical and verbal level, right? Because as soon as you get angry, then your physical and verbal actions will be negative, and they'll generally inflame the situation. When your mind is more subdued, then your physical and verbal actions, you actually have a lot more at your disposal, because you don't have to only respond in the way that anger tells you to respond. You can check, what is the most skillful way for me to respond in this situation, while maintaining your mental peace of mind. And recognizing also, some people you can't necessarily change your relationship with them in this lifetime. That's also possibly the case. Some people, you have an ongoing difficult relationship with them, and although you might develop loving kindness from your side towards them, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to change their behavior from their side. So then what that becomes is like an excellent practice for you, because you're not really getting anything out of it from the other person. It's like I was saying before, when we have loving kindness and compassion towards those people that we're close to, it feels like we're putting something in the friendship bank. So for me to be loving and kind towards these people, in response, you know, they will be loving and kind towards me. But when you're dealing with people who are constantly difficult to you, then there's nothing that if you know, really try and practice this wish for them to be happy and this wish for them to be free from suffering, it's not as though they are going to then start to be nice to you, these particular type of people. You know, you've probably encountered them sometimes in your life. So what it is for you is it's this amazing practice of how can I maintain my mental calmness and peace of mind in this situation where there's really nothing in it for me in terms of what the other person will give to me. There is an awful lot of it in for, like there's awful lot in for you from your own side, because when your mind becomes peaceful, calm, loving, kind, regardless of this person continually making problems for you, then actually that's a great benefit for yourself. I mean, it's amazing. This is why we say actually enemies are the most kind to us, especially in our practice of patience, because they're the ones that we can practice a pure loving kindness towards that's not going to be mixed with attachment. Does it ring true to you? Does it make sense?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. There is so much work, I can spend time on this and take away.
It's our life's work. It's like, and it's an amazing practice to be able to do. It really is. Like, if you think on the one hand, an angry mind, a mind that's always subject to anger, even though we know the tools, that anger still keeps coming on, you know, like to have that kind of a mind, as opposed to a mind that is so thoroughly habituated to loving kindness and to compassion. I mean, there's no comparison, right? Work to develop this other kind of mind in our life. It's amazing practice to do. Really, it's like an amazing life's practice.
Thank you.
Cynthia, do you have a question?
Yes, Venerables. I'm just a little bit like I need more clarification when you say like my mind at the moment that I'm trying to decide I need to practice more loving kindness. I know that then patience needs to be the antidote. So at some point when I'm more habituated to having loving kindness, so is the mind still decide? So I'm thinking, is the patience only is necessary if our mind is not yet habituated? So I'm just thinking, does a bodhisattva, for example, because their mind is just automatically about loving kindness, that their mind does not decide at that moment, oh, I have to be patient. It's more spontaneous. So there's no need for the patience at all. Meaning they're just automatically, so there's not even the anger actually coming up. I'm just like thinking, so I'm just kind of like, because like in Shayla's and my example, like we're deciding at that moment, we know we can control. But you're saying that you can't control. In fact, you can't control that. So where are we in our practice when, yeah, we can delay it a few seconds, but not quite, because we did actually release our anger. So when loving kindness becomes spontaneous, then are we saying patience is totally no longer something there's no need to practice? It's kind of, because your mind is now habituated automatically to loving kindness. I don't know. Am I making sense? Sorry.
Yeah. Well, so basically it's a spectrum, right? So where we are at the moment is we're at the start point. You know, we understand a little bit that anger is negative and it's harmful to ourselves and it's harmful to others. And we understand a little bit about the tools by which we can reduce our anger, right? But it's all very weak in our mind. So the anger, however, that's been with us, think about it from a Buddhist perspective, that's been with us since beginningless time. We've habituated with it since beginningless time. So that is very, very, very strong. And it's almost like anger is effortless. It's almost like it's automatic. You just come across that challenging situation, that difficult person, and anger, it's like just right there. You don't even have to think about the reasons to get angry, just pops up. Whereas for us, the loving kindness, we have to think about a lot of reasons as to why it's suitable to have loving kindness, why it's beneficial to have loving kindness, why it's totally logical to have loving kindness. And we need to do a lot of thinking in order to generate even just a small amount of loving kindness. That's because we haven't put the effort in, and the familiarity has not been there since beginningless time. Yeah. So that's how it is for us. So we're kind of at the start of the process. Then you look at how it is for bodhisattvas. So also bodhisattvas, there's a great range, of bodhisattvas. There's those who are bodhisattvas just at the start of the path, and those that are like right towards the ending, are almost Buddhas. So we say that actually a bodhisattva doesn't perfect patience until what's called the third ground. So that's like past halfway on the path to the state of a Buddha. So even bodhisattvas, when they've become bodhisattvas, then they still are working on their patience. It's not like just as soon as you become a bodhisattva, then you're never going to get angry again. In fact, there are a lot of stories that are told about bodhisattvas getting like higher bodhisattvas getting getting angry at lower bodhisattvas getting angry at higher bodhisattvas, not really high ones, definitely not those who've already perfected patience, who are well advanced, but these lower type of bodhisattvas, the strength, even though they have an uncontrived, effortless mind of enlightenment, an effortless altruistic intention to benefit others, even bodhisattvas in their, early on, they can still get angry because that's the power of anger. Yeah. But for the most part, for a bodhisattva, when they see a difficult person, sort of generalizing, when they see a difficult person, when they come across somebody who seeks to harm them, their natural reaction would be to have loving kindness, would be to have compassion. So for them, that really becomes more like an automatic or almost like an effortless reaction. But yet still, for those early on bodhisattvas, they still do have some work to do, and they still can be subject to anger arising in their mind. Yeah. So there's like really a spectrum, and we can say, like, how do we progress along that spectrum to become like a really advanced bodhisattva who's then perfected patience, and there is like absolutely no chance. Doesn't matter what harm you could do. It talks about like on the third ground bodhisattva who's perfected patience. You could have somebody who comes along and chops up their body, not in like a really quick way and gets it over and done with, but does it in a really slow way, trying to torture that bodhisattva as much as possible. And the bodhisattva not only will not get angry, actually their compassion for that person, understanding what the results of that negative action will be for them, then their compassion, it just increases more and more. So those are the stories of those really higher level bodhisattvas. But where does that practice of patience come from? It comes from all the training that has gone before. So right from where we are at the start of our training and all the training that's happened, somebody becomes a bodhisattva and then continues to train in those early stages of being a bodhisattva. That's where that perfected patience comes from. So a bodhisattva doesn't just wake up one morning and go, oh, got no anger anymore. It's all gone. Right? It's like, oh, my patience is perfect. It doesn't happen just one day. It happens from training. Yeah. So however much we can do in our training, we're only going to benefit ourselves and bring ourselves closer and closer to developing that automatic loving kindness and that automatic compassion. Yeah. Do you have any other questions about this point? No? Okay. All right. So going back to our discussion about who's in control, right? So for instance, when somebody beats you with a stick, we say you get angry at the person, not angry at the stick. So the question then, just a second. All right. Okay. Okay, so the question is really, is it logical or is it fair to get angry at the person who is wielding the stick? Because if we look at what's going on in their mind, actually, they don't have control, like we don't really have control over our own mind. We might understand some of the tools, but we haven't yet been able to completely control our minds, right? So likewise, it's the same for everybody else. So generally, we can say the way that a person, I think we talked about this maybe in the first session. So the way in which a person engages in a negative action is like by this process. So, what's going on? Oh no, is my pen not working? Okay, I may have lost battery power in my pen, which means, unfortunately, I might have to write with my finger. Sorry. Yep, okay. Apologies, but this is not going to be neat. Okay. So we have, oh, this is really not neat at all. Okay, so we have ignorance, which is at the root, right? Independence upon ignorance, then, a person performs an action, right? That action, do you remember this, this diagram? I think we talked about it in the first week. Yeah. Okay, performs an action. That places a seed in the mental continuum. And that seed will lead to a result, which will be either positive or it will be negative. So if the action was a negative action, like in harming somebody with a stick, then it will be a negative result, some kind of suffering. If it is a positive action, so for instance, motivated by compassion, making a donation to somebody who needs money, then that would be give rise to a positive result, which would be one of happiness. So in terms of this person who's beating us with the stick, they're at the very root, they're controlled by ignorance. So ignorance, then what it does is we can say it leads to this action, but how does the action come about? Well, what really happens is ignorance leads to things like, well, is combined with things like self-cherishing. So that self-cherishing is a kind of mind that holds oneself as to be the most precious and really disregards others. So together, ignorance together with self-cherishing is like the sort of axis of evil that we have in our own mind. That ignorance together with that self-cherishing really makes it, they're the ones that make us, sort of more or less force us to engage in negative actions. And then in dependence upon that, a person will give rise to probably anger. And on the basis of anger, then they'll engage in that action, whether it be beating us with a stick or saying harsh words, that kind of thing. So that's the process that happens in a person's mind. It's the process that happens in our mind. It's a process that happens in everybody else's mind as well. So when we look at the person, so the person themselves is not, we don't say the person is the ignorance, We don't say the person is the self-cherishing. We don't say the person is the anger. We don't even say the person is the action. The person and all these things that are going on in their mental continuum, they're actually different things. So you can remove ignorance from your mind stream. You can remove self-cherishing. You can remove anger. You can stop all the negative actions within your mind stream. You still have a person, right? So the person then would become a very sort of positive person. Because whether a person is a positive person or a negative type person, I mean like a good person or a bad person, really is determined by what's going on in their mind. And on that basis, what kind of actions they engage in. So in this case, the person who is beating us with a stick is controlled by their ignorance, by their self-cherishing, and by their anger. Also, it's like, I think Cynthia, maybe you mentioned before, it's like they've got suffering going on in there. So there's probably also in here some suffering that's happening. And due to their suffering, right? So they have some suffering happening, and their self-cherishing is saying, I don't want that suffering. I want only happiness for myself. And I'm going to try and achieve that regardless of whether that affects anybody else or not, because I am the most important. This is what self-cherishing does. So none of us want suffering. All of us want happiness. Self-cherishing gets in there and says, well, it's most important for me to have happiness. It's most important for me to not have suffering. Everybody else is subsidiary to that. So on that basis then, having some suffering there, then the anger, because they all have these assumptions just like we do, anger protects me, anger is going to reduce my suffering, anger is going to give me power to achieve my happiness, all of those assumptions that we discussed last week. Everybody else has those assumptions too, right? So the self-cherishing really allows all those assumptions to flourish, and it's basically like a person has no choice but to get angry as long as they have all that other stuff going on in their mind. Through that familiarity and habituation with anger, then anger is the thing that will come up. If we are not able to actually make a choice and not be angry in a difficult situation, and we actually know the tools to use to stop our anger, then why do we expect everybody else is going to be able to make that choice to not get angry? Just realistically, like how can you expect it for everybody else but still not be able to do it for yourself? Yeah. So in actual fact, if you were to say, who is the one in control? When we look at somebody who's beating you with a stick, who is the one that's really in control? Because we said we don't get angry at the stick because they don't have control. It's really the person who's wielding the stick. So is it the person who's really in control? Not really. Actually, it's the anger that's in control. Also, it's the self-cherishing that's in control. And it's the ignorance that's in control. So if you were to say it's logical to get angry at the person and not the stick because the person is the one who's actually in control of the beating, then you'd have to say also logically that it's not logical to get angry at the person because they're not actually the ones in control. The ones in control are the ignorance, the self-cherishing, and the anger. So if you want to get angry at something in this situation, then you have to say the ones you can get angry at are the anger, are the self-cherishing, and the ignorance in that other person's continuum. So if you were to get angry at the ignorance, the self-cherishing, and the anger in another person's continuum, what that means, if we think about the actual definition of anger, which involves this intention to harm. So if you were to develop an intention to harm the ignorance, the self-cherishing, and the anger in another person's continuum, is that an intention to harm the person, or is that an intention to benefit the person? think this is a really interesting thing to think about, right? So,
sorry, would you mind saying that again?
Yeah, sure.
No,
So,
thank you.
if you have an intention to harm the ignorance, the self-cherishing, and the anger in another person's continuum, would you have then an intention to harm that person, or would you have an intention to benefit that person? Remember, we talk about the ignorance, self-cherishing, and anger are not the person. The person is actually imputed onto their mental continuum. They're actually not the same thing. So if you had an intention to harm, you had ill will towards the ignorance, the self-cherishing, and anger in another person's continuum, would you be seeking, so an intention to harm those, would you be seeking to harm the person, or would you be seeking to benefit the person?
Well, it sounds a bit convoluted, but it does sound like you're wanting to benefit them.
Yeah. If you want to harm, and you're like on the basis of wanting to harm the ignorance, self-cherishing, and anger in that other person's continuum, you would not be seeking to harm the person themselves. In fact, what you would be doing if you wanted to try and get rid of the ignorance, the self-cherishing, and the anger in that other person's continuum, the way you would approach the person themselves is different to how anger approaches that person themselves. Anger would want to hurt the person, whereas here you're having anger towards, or ill will towards the ignorance, self-cherishing, and anger in their continuum. If you want to harm those, you actually benefit the person. Is it too difficult to think of? Right. So if we think about,
oh, sorry.
No.
So what would a practical example look like if that was your intention?
Well, then that depends, doesn't it? It's not going to be hitting the person back. That will not get rid of their ignorance, self-cherishing, and anger. That will only probably inflame their ignorance, self-cherishing, and anger. So it depends on the situation as to what that would look like. So would it be explaining to the person how their actions are harming themselves as well as harming others? Depends, would the person be open to it at that point? Would it be modeling the right behavior to that person so that, by osmosis, they get a sense of what's a correct way to go about, living life? Would it mean actually using a bit more forceful means, and you have to say something very forcefully to another person to get them to realize that it's the ignorance, self-cherishing, and anger that's causing the problem in their continuum? It really depends on the situation and your relationship with that person. But whether you even say something or whether you do something, that's what happens on a physical or a verbal level. What we're talking about here is having an ill will towards the ignorance, self-cherishing, and anger in their continuum on a mental level, which means actually what you're wishing them to have is happiness and the causes of happiness, and also to be free from suffering and the causes of suffering, because oops, I was trying to draw on my laptop rather than my iPad. So these guys here, these are all causes for suffering. Yeah, because on the basis of these actions, or these ignorance, self-cherishing, and anger, they engage in actions that lead to seeds being placed in their mental continuum, which, given that the actions were negative, lead to a negative result of suffering. Is it too much information? Is it too kind of like difficult to get your head around? It requires some thought, I mean, I feel like this is kind of a bit of it's almost like an advanced way of thinking about this subject matter, right? Because the idea of having anger towards afflictions, like anger in another person's continuum, it doesn't actually look like the anger that we normally have. All right. So the anger that we normally have is this thing we think of as being something that's quite fiery, that allows us to do harm to other people, other beings. But this kind of anger or ill will is actually directed towards something that is incredibly negative and has no benefit whatsoever to another person or to ourselves. And so what happens is that kind of anger is not that sort of fiery intention to cause suffering type thing. Not at all. Here, what this type of anger that's directed towards anger, self-cherishing, and ignorance is actually, it could be quite strong, it could be quite powerful, but it's not an intention to cause suffering. It's actually an intention to cause benefit, to cause happiness. It's causing happiness to the person. So on the basis, we talked about anger as something that has this kind of power or strength that, can help us get fired up. So this, likewise, having this ill will towards these afflictions through understanding the suffering that they cause to that person and to others, you can have quite a powerful state of mind arising, which thinks, I'm going to do whatever I can to really help this person. I mean, maybe I can't do it immediately. Maybe I'm thinking down the track, I will benefit this person, whether it's in this life or future lifetimes. I'm going to benefit this person to make sure that I can help them to get rid of their own anger, to get rid of their own self-cherishing, to get rid of their own ignorance, so that they only have wisdom, they only have loving kindness, they have compassion, they have cherishing of others in their continuum, so that they are a happier person, so that their mind streams are happier. So that's quite a powerful attitude, isn't it, to have towards another person. So before we talked about one of the underlying assumptions of anger is that it gives us this power to act. Well, likewise, I think compassion actually can give you a great power to act. I feel like maybe this is like too much. Is it too much? I'll stop sharing the board.
No, this is fantastic. This is fantastic.
Yeah, I think we have to gradually kind of cut out these wrong assumptions that we have that are really all tied in with our afflictions. The assumptions of that the afflictions are helpful. Things like anger is helpful, pride is helpful, jealousy is helpful, afflicted pride, all of those things are helpful to me. They've been with us for a long time. That doesn't mean that they're helpful to us. So we need to think about different ways of approaching our mind. What is really a helpful way of thinking about my own mind? So this is why I bring up this it's quite a different approach to thinking about ourselves and towards others as well. So the principle of this one with the example with the stick, isn't it? So we said it's not appropriate to get angry at the stick because the stick's not in control. It's appropriate to get angry at the person because they're the one who is in control of the stick. We would say, well, logically, it's also not appropriate to get angry at the person because the one who is in control of the person is the anger in their continuum and also the self-cherishing and the ignorance. That it's okay to have ill will towards, no problem, because you will not then, on that basis of having ill will towards ignorance, anger, and self-cherishing, you won't seek to do harm. You'll only seek to do benefit. So that's okay. If you have ill will towards the person, you will seek to do harm to the person. So that's the distinction. If, on the other hand, we look at the logic a little differently and we say, okay, so you say it's appropriate to have anger, ill will towards the person, that's okay because they're the ones who are kind of in control. Well, likewise, you have to say, well, really, the person is the one who's being wielded by the afflictions. So it would be logical, therefore, to have anger at the stick. But nobody, if they're being beaten by somebody with a stick and then the person throws the stick away, nobody's going to run after the stick, are they? They're going to go, right, I'm going to get that stick. The stick better watch it out now because I'm after it, right? Nobody does that, do they? But that's the logic, right? So either it's okay to get angry at this, to get angry at the stick, or we have to really say the thing that's really appropriate to get angry at is the afflictions in that person's continuum. That's really the one. Okay,
Kind of
so
like drugs and the addict, and when the addict steals items so that they can purchase more drugs, and are you upset with the fact that they're stealing? Are you angry that that they're using drugs? Can't be angry at the drugs, but yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah, I'd say it's like pretty much exactly the same. In fact, we're all really like addicts in a different way. We're addicts to the pleasures of cyclic existence. It's like we just want more and more and more of them. And we think that we are the most important. This is what self-cherishing does. And so it's me who should get the most of the pleasures of cyclic existence at the expense of others. Right. So this is, I'm kind of stating it in a very general way, but this is essentially what our self-cherishing does together with our attachment to the pleasures of cyclic existence. I need more pleasure. I need more pleasure. I don't want any suffering whatsoever. And I'm the most important in all of that. So I'll do what I need to do in order to get my next fix of pleasure. This is what we do. So it's basically a socially acceptable way of being addicted. Whereas people who are drug and alcohol addicts, then that's not socially acceptable. But the process is essentially the same. Yeah. So in both cases, we're not under our own control. We're not independent. We're actually governed by our attachment, governed by our anger, governed by our self-cherishing. And so that's a reason to have compassion for others. It's not a reason to have anger and hatred to others. It's like, we can also say if somebody is having a psychotic break and they otherwise have been your friend, but then they come at you with a knife. You understand that that person is going through some kind of psychosis. And so it's unlikely that you'll get angry at the person themselves. What you'll try and do is you'll try and disarm them in a way that's not going to harm them and not going to harm you. Yeah. But it's unlikely you'll get angry at the person because you understand that they're under the control of their mental illness. And in the same way, it's like we've all got this issue where we're under the control of these afflictions, which are really like, they're like sort of mental illnesses within ourselves. Yeah, they control us. They make us do stuff that is not logically a good thing to do. And so that's the attitude we should have towards all beings, is that they're really under the control of these really negative emotions within their own mind. And that's what is causing them to engage in all this negative behavior. And what it should do then is drive us to really try and do whatever we can to remove that control over our own minds and over the minds of others. So remove that control of the afflictions. The best thing for us to do, or the thing that we have the most ability to do, is to work on our own minds. It's like we can't actually cause other people to reduce their afflictions through our own work. We can explain how to do it, but we ourselves are the only ones who can do it for our own minds. So that's like our main practice, is to work on our own minds. Yeah. Do you have any questions? Any other questions? So I did have a few other questions on this sheet. Just one second, sorry. To consider. We only actually got to the first question. But actually, no, also the other questions are kind of answered. So when somebody harms us, who is the one in control of that action? So we really say it's the afflictions that are in the control. So ignorance, and the anger, and also combined with the self-cherishing, then is a person who does harm to others deserving of our loving kindness and compassion? Well, very much so, because if they didn't have those afflictions, then they wouldn't harm others. So wanting somebody to be free from their afflictions, that's really compassion, isn't it? So of course they're deserving of our compassion. And then the third question is, who benefits when I myself generate loving kindness and compassion to someone who harms me? It's ourselves that benefit the most from that. And it's ourselves that will lose if we don't, because it's our own peace of mind that will be destroyed. We create the causes for future suffering as well. And we probably inflame the situation through our anger. Yeah, so those are just kind of like 3 questions that I thought that are good to reflect on in your own practice of patience. Okay, I do hope it hasn't been too much. I feel like I've done an awful lot of talking, and I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you have any thoughts?
I think this is a lot to wrap around because I don't want to generalize. I just react. I don't think. I'm reacting. So I think what you are saying is, need to pause, now assess the situation, and then act upon it, right? Which is not default. So it's very hard to understand, comprehend. But like you said, it's going to be beneficial to us and to the other person. So I think that's the hard thing, because by default, it's just reacting.
That's right. Yeah. So the first step is to make a bit of space in there. So make space between what happens and then our reaction to it. So that's the first thing to do. And we'll do that through reflecting over these points. As soon as you start to see, really have that conviction in your mind that anger is not helpful to me in this situation, and that there is something else that could be helpful instead, that starts to give you a little bit of a pause, a little bit of a break between those two, so that you don't automatically go for anger as your only tool. Yeah. So that is definitely the first step. And then gradually over time, through more and more training, it will become easier and easier. There's nothing that does not become easier with familiarity. But it's that initial bit of just trying to come to terms with a different way of thinking about all of this. I think it can be quite challenging. Any other thoughts?
Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to share something that you reminded me of. I'm a retired police officer, and I got attacked quite often, whether it was, drug addicts or whatever. But it was always easier to say this. When I say this, it sounds terrible. It was always easier to handle a situation when I was being attacked by somebody with a mental illness, because it was like, oh, all right, they're not in their right mind. And so maybe it's just going to be easier to look at people with these mental afflictions as mental illness. I don't know, because at this point it's easier, well, for me to handle somebody with kid gloves and maybe take the punch or the kick or whatever, and not react in anger, because then just to let that anger,
It's exactly
how
the
dare they?
point.
And then, yeah.
Yep, that's exactly the point. It's like whether that situation has disturbed your mind or not has depended upon the way that you think about it. So since you've had that underlying thought of this person is not in control of their actions, they're not in their right mind. And so that automatically stops the assumption that actually that person is in control of their actions, and that supports anger. So you've stopped that assumption. And so your mind remains undisturbed, and it probably means that your actions on that basis were more considered, probably turned out better in the long run than other actions that you might have taken on the basis of anger. So I think it's totally fair to apply that same approach towards all beings. Because when people are consumed by their anger, then they're not in their right mind, you know. Like if you had a choice and you could just have a loving mind and just have a compassionate mind and a mind that's filled with wisdom, you wouldn't behave negatively towards others. You wouldn't allow anger to arise in your mind because you would understand that that's so detrimental to yourself and to others. Yeah. Okay. Any other final thoughts? Cynthia, did you have something else
Well, I
to
was just
say?
gonna say that it made sense, but the reason it's complex is because it does look like we do have to reduce our self-cherishing before we can even, because the moment I'm hurt, I am self-cherishing, I'm protecting myself. So then I get angry. So ultimately it's, I have to reduce my thinking of myself, right? And more of others. It seems the bottom line is that.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, we want to try and eliminate our self-cherishing altogether, but that is quite difficult. So, like at the start, as we try and work towards that, if we can at least make it so that our self-cherishing is not a type of self-cherishing that disregards others, so that we might cherish ourselves and still, you know, have that feeling like I really want happiness for myself and my happiness is like important, but then also think that others' happiness is equally important. So you're cherishing both yourself and you're cherishing others. It's like a stepping stone to really then getting to the point where when you look at bodhisattvas, I mean, they've completely eliminated cherishing from their own mind, of self-cherishing from their own mind. They only cherish others. But we probably need like a little, you know, pathway to get there because it's quite difficult. So at the very least, then we want to make sure that we cherish others as much as we do ourselves. Yeah. Okay, well, time's up for this week. We've only got 1 week left, I realise. I don't know if we're going to be able to cover all 4 types of patients, but we'll see next week. Most important, I think, is to have a good discussion about these points and to really come to understand and start to get an idea of how we can apply them ourselves, you know, to whatever extent we can. That's the most important. Otherwise, you might know more tools, but still not know how to apply them. And then, you know, is there a great benefit from that? I don't know. So if you have more questions, please ask them and I'll answer them as best as I can. And we'll see how we go next week. All right. So let's finish off with the final dedication prayers. Okay, there we go. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Okay, thank you very much, everybody, and I look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.